At 3:15 a.m. on the Oskol River, a Russian army major was leisurely enjoying a stretch of calm, so quiet it made him complacent. He and his comrades were certain that their 6-mile convoy, a giant iron python of more than 350 vehicles, was untouchable. The convoy carried enough ammunition to sustain combat operations for roughly 15,000 soldiers, so in their eyes it wasn't merely a transport column, but a rolling mobile fortress. For Moscow, it was also a tactical card to place on the negotiating table, meant to create leverage and apply pressure in the peace talks scheduled to take place in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, on February 4 and 5. This was a show of force designed to apply pressure, forcing Zelensky and Trump to make concessions at the negotiating table, while allowing Putin to walk into talks with his head held high. In theory, the convoy was like a mobile fortress, nearly untouchable. It was wrapped in a dense deployment of mobile Pantsir S-1 air defense systems, forming a protective ring roughly 8 miles wide. Above them, the Nebo M radar, an array worth millions of dollars, kept sweeping the sky, with a capability to track extremely small targets, even exaggerated to the point of saying it could catch a baseball from 650 feet away. That's why they believed they were completely safe. The moment anything dared to come near the convoy, it would be detected and crushed instantly. But they were entirely wrong. Because while those expensive radar eyes were obsessively hunting the air, they were blind to what was quietly unfolding right at ground level, right under their noses. Hidden in silence on the snow-covered, ice-cold steel beams of the bridge, an entire swarm of drones was sleeping motionless, like a gecko lying in wait for its prey. They had been cleverly disguised as rusted maintenance equipment dusted with snow, but the truth was far more dangerous. These were Kishak Reboff FPVs, each one costing only around $800. For the past 72 hours, they had stayed perfectly still, waiting for one precise moment. The Russians had made a fatal assumption that every drone strike would come from the sky and depend on radio signals, something they believed they could jam and break. But these FPVs operated with a frightening level of autonomy. They didn't need continuous contact. They didn't need obvious guidance signals. They were waiting for just one thing: a single, heavily encrypted data packet, a digital wake-up order sent at exactly the right time. And the moment that signal appeared, the onboard artificial intelligence took over instantly. No GPS, no pilot, no familiar flight path. They navigated using the bridge's structure itself as a living map, tracking beams, rails, and spans, turning themselves into smart torpedoes that could find their own way to the target. The risk at this point was brutally simple. If the convoy crossed, 15,000 Russian soldiers would be resupplied, and Moscow would walk into negotiations with leverage in hand. But if the convoy was stopped, Russia's southern front would run out of ammunition within 72 hours, and their diplomatic pressure would evaporate like smoke. Then, right on cue, the final piece of the trap clicked into place exactly as Ukraine's brain had calculated. The convoy began to slow down in the middle of the bridge, not because of tactics, not because of caution, but for something more pathetic. Russia's infamous cheap tires, after a long journey, began to burst and tear in clusters. The result was a bottleneck, forming in the most dangerous zone, where slowing down for just a few minutes was enough to become a target. Dozens of miles away, inside a hidden command post, a Ukrainian operator watched the convoy slow to a near crawl. The target had slid into the perfect kill window. He drew a deep breath and pressed a single key. For just 1 millisecond, a data packet shot through the air. Beneath the bridge, 12 pale green indicator lights blinked in unison, like something coming alive. The trap had been set. The bait had been taken. And the ghosts were about to wake. 3:45 a.m. 12 electromagnetic clamps released at the same instant. The Kishak drones dropped into a single heartbeat of free fall, then their brushless motors kicked in, stabilizing them on their launch platforms just 3 feet above the river. The high-frequency whine of their rotors vanished, swallowed whole by the low, rolling thunder of the 80,000-ton convoy grinding across the bridge above. On the bridge, the radio operator with the lead battalion followed procedure, reporting on schedule, voice steady, almost cold. Reached the Kupiansk checkpoint. Convoy has completed 60% of the route to the objective. All systems normal, no threats detected. Below him, 12 drones were already arranged into 3 separate pre-programmed strike groups. They skimmed just above the waterline, using the bridge's massive concrete pillars as cover, shielding themselves from any imaging sweep or radar search that might come from the riverbanks. Their flight path wasn't a simple straight line. The onboard AI used LiDAR to actively map the underside of the bridge in real time, making hundreds of micro adjustments every second to navigate through a maze of steel beams and concrete supports. The targeting protocols were already locked in. Group 1-6 drones carried the primary mission: strike the ammunition trucks, concentrated in the convoy's vulnerable center. Group 2-4 drones was assigned to hit the unarmored fuel vehicles. Group 3, the final 2 drones, would execute the final blow, aimed at eliminating the command and control vehicles. The operation had entered its most dangerous, most fragile phase. The technology was performing flawlessly, and the plan was unfolding exactly as designed. Now, the entire mission hinged on a single unpredictable factor, one no system could fully control: the human element. When dawn was still dim and the snow began to fall thicker, the Russian soldiers, 4 hours into their freezing watch, were so exhausted they turned careless. They glanced down beneath the bridge at the worst possible moment: 3:47 a.m. The drone team was now only about 900 feet from its designated launch point. The operation ran with a chilling smoothness, precise route, perfect timing. They were almost invisible to the massive Nebo M radar sweeping the sky from miles away, because the real threat wasn't up high. It was crawling silently along the underside of the bridge. But right beneath the span, inside the cramped Pantsir S1 command vehicle, a young lieutenant felt something was offbeat. Not a clear signal on the screen, just electronic noise, a faint flicker, the kind of digital interference that in 99% of cases, people would dismiss as harmless. He didn't trust the boredom of a routine shift. He trusted instinct. No permission. No waiting for confirmation. He shut down the passive sensors and switched the target acquisition radar into active pulse mode, forcing a concentrated beam of energy straight down into the space beneath the bridge. In an instant, the display lit up like a Christmas tree. Perfect lock. He squeezed the trigger. A 57E6 missile, an elegant piece of hardware worth around $150,000, tore off the launcher and plunged beneath the bridge. But at roughly 30 feet deep, it didn't hit the real target. It slammed straight into a Ukrainian decoy worth just $50 quietly activated only moments earlier. The decoy vaporized in a spectacular blast, and it was completely useless in tactical terms. But that useless explosion achieved the one thing that mattered most. It pulled the alarm. It woke the entire system, and it told everyone that something was coming in very close. Suddenly, the convoy's entire radio net erupted at once, panicked, shouting overlapping in broken bursts, "Explosion, explosion, explosion under the bridge!" Red warning lights started flashing across the control panels like a seizure. Truck drivers slammed the brakes. In a single heartbeat, what had been an orderly, disciplined column turned into a chaotic traffic jam, hundreds of vehicles bunching up, locking themselves in place right in the middle of a deadly zone. The soldiers riding on the trucks, on turrets, inside command vehicles, everyone snapped, fully awake. The dull fatigue of a long watch was gone. What remained was one thing: clear, wide-eyed fear. And in that same moment, the element of surprise vanished. The ghosts beneath the bridge were no longer ghosts. Ukraine struck first, but that strike also yanked the alarm cord, waking a sleeping bear, furious, confused, and ready to maul anything it could see. Now the question wasn't, how do you attack? It was, how do you hit a target when the target already knows you're coming? At 3:47 a.m., on the guard's screen, the young lieutenant, the man who had just squeezed the trigger, looked like a hero for about 3 seconds. Then the only clean contact he'd had just moments earlier vanished. His display turned into a wreck. Phantom returns, reflections bouncing off the bridge's rebar and steel, smeared across the swirling black water below. He scrambled to re-establish a lock, only to realize he was aiming at a ghost. And the most frightening part was this. The enemy wasn't panicking. This wasn't a human pilot fumbling at the controls. This was an artificial intelligence executing its counter-response protocol with cold, digital precision. The remaining 11 drones changed course instantly. They snapped into a classic arcing maneuver, rotating their path to fly at a perfect 90-degree angle to the armored vehicle's radar dish. It sounds minor until you understand how devastating it really is. To see why, think like a police speed gun. It measures speed based on how fast you're moving toward it or away from it. If you could somehow drive perfectly past the officer cutting across his line, your speed relative to the gun would be close to zero. To the Pantsir's onboard computer, designed to filter out objects that appear stationary or near stationary, those drones simply disappeared. They blended into the bridge's structural clutter, becoming part of the background noise. But the Ukrainians weren't just trying to hide. They were trying to blind. The drone closest to the armored vehicle activated its built-in jammer, blasting a high-energy X-band interference stream. The effect was immediate. The lieutenant's screen flipped from chaotic clutter to a wall of blinding white noise like a flashbang detonating right inside his eyes. And that's the moment Ukraine's AI turned what could have been a near disaster into a brilliant move. The system had already calculated a 97% chance that the missile response would trigger a total convoy lockup based on intelligence about the poor quality of Russian truck tires and how easily a sudden brake chain would collapse the entire column into gridlock. So while the Russians were blind, confused, and trapped in a traffic jam of their own making, the drones didn't press the attack. Instead, they used those priceless seconds of chaos to slip deeper beneath the bridge beams, reset into stealth positioning, and wait for the perfect strike window. They had survived the first counterpunch. They had proven they were smarter than their opponent. But they had also just shown their hand. They had made it clear to the Russians this wasn't a fight against cheap toys. This was a fight against a technological phantom, cold, precise, and capable of breaking an entire system. And a Russian officer cornered, humiliated, and trapped inside that command vehicle was about to do something dangerously reckless. 3:48 a.m., roughly 70 miles from Kupiansk, at 30,000 feet, a completely different kind of Russian eye began flashing an alert. It was the A-50, their airborne eye. If a Pantsir is just a security guard pacing the ground with a flashlight, then the A-50 is the head of security in the control room, flipping on a stadium floodlight. And the moment that light comes on, there's nowhere left to hide. The A-50 Schmelem radar doesn't care about ground clutter. It doesn't get fooled by little tricks being corner cutting, bridge shadowing, or background noise. It does one thing. It looks down, and it sees everything. To its sensors, those tiny heat traces and stitched together drone bodies stood out against the freezing concrete like bright streaks in a dark room. And instantly, the rules of the game changed. Inside the command bay beneath the bridge, the Russian lieutenant's screen just moments ago, a sea of blinding white interference suddenly snapped back into focus. A new symbol appeared, not a flicker, not a ghost signal, but a top-down targeting line, razor sharp, transmitted straight through the A-50's data link. The Phantom was back in his crosshairs, but the worst part still wasn't over. That same data stream, that same verified targeting line, was simultaneously pushed to an S-400 battery roughly 80 kilometers away. Their computer didn't hesitate for a second. With the A-50 acting as the certifier, the target was locked cleanly, no debate needed. And that's when the ultimate threat showed up. On the Ukrainian operator's display, a missile launch warning began to blink. A missile designed to bring down hypersonic fighter jets was now racing in to hunt $800 drones. An insane mismatch. But in war, that kind of insanity is often what kills the fastest. The drone's artificial intelligence was now being forced into a situation it was never designed to survive. Its tactical stealth layer had been stripped away. The little tricks of slipping under the bridge to dodge radar no longer mattered once the A-50 turned on the stadium lights from the sky. And the jamming system, what had just blinded the Pantsir, was now meaningless, because it couldn't overpower the bandwidth and viewing angles of an airborne system. In other words, the escape route had been locked. A hypersonic missile was screaming in, only a few seconds remained until impact. The entire mission, and the multi-million-dollar intelligence operation behind it, suddenly hung on a single choice. A split-second decision by an AI that had just been forced into a losing position. 3:49 a.m. The S-400 launch warning was no longer a signal. It was a death clock beginning its countdown 5 seconds. The missile was closing at Mach 12. On the A-50 screen, the Russian operators barely had time to exhale. They saw the target lock confirmed, and they celebrated as if victory were already in their hands. But the drone's artificial intelligence didn't try to run from the missile. That would have been pointless. You can't outrun the laws of physics. Instead, it triggered Omega Protocol 7, a pre-programmed contingency built for this exact worst-case scenario. A small hatch on the drone's belly snapped open. In less than a second, a thin fiber optic line unfurled, about 30 meters long. At the end of that cable hung a compact device the size of a beer can, an ALE-50 towed decoy. And this wasn't some cheap flare. The ALE-50 was a sophisticated deception. It didn't just generate heat. It actively captured the radar energy emitted by the S-400 and then retransmitted a perfectly amplified echo. It created a radar return bigger, louder, more tempting, 100 times stronger than the drone itself. To the S-400 missile screaming in, it felt like being ordered to man-mark the smallest player on the field. And then suddenly, a 300-pound linebacker steps right next to you and yells, "I'm wide open!" The S-400 seeker was immediately pulled off course. It switched targets on the spot, violently snapping its trajectory to chase the more delicious electronic decoy. 3 seconds later, a $3 million missile detonated harmlessly over the Oskol River, destroying nothing but a decoy worth less than an old used car. On the A-50's radar display, the controllers stared in disbelief. Their ultimate weapon had just been defeated by something that looked like a fishing line with a walkie-talkie attached. But the Ukrainians didn't just survive, they flipped the table and counterattacked. That high-altitude detonation of the S-400 wasn't merely a failure. It became a signal, a perfectly timed beacon in the sky, forcing every Russian air defense unit within a 50-mile radius to look up. And right as every Russian eye was glued to that fading fireball above 3:49 a.m., on the Ukrainian operator's screen, what appeared wasn't a line of text. It was a single data packet executed instantly. 11 drones stopped hiding. They surged upward from beneath the bridge, electric motors screaming at maximum RPM. This was no longer a stealth strike. This was a speed race. And their target wasn't the trucks. Their target was the concrete layer directly beneath the bridge's spine, right under them. Their internal navigation system immune to jamming locked onto coordinates with an error margin of just 3 FFT. The first drone slammed straight into the bridge's main load-bearing girder right beneath the lead ammunition truck. The armor-piercing warhead drove down like a steel drill bit, punching through 25 inches of reinforced concrete in an instant. Then, one by one, the remaining 10 drones followed, striking pre-programmed points along the bridge's spine. No hesitation, no mistiming. Every hit carried the cold precision of a calculation. The entire coordinated strike unfolded in under 2 seconds. And it's right here that the true cunning of Ukraine's plan reveals itself. The fuses didn't detonate on impact. The blast was delayed by exactly 1.1 seconds. Why? Because the drones weren't the main weapon, they were only the trigger. The goal wasn't to punch a hole in the roadway. The goal was to create a sealed pressure chamber directly underneath. The space between the river surface and the underside of the bridge instantly became a containment chamber. The explosion was no longer an open-air blast, it became something far more violent. The pressure wave from the shaped charges slammed into the water, rebounded upward into the concrete, and amplified itself into a catastrophic udar, an estimated shockwave of around 5,000 pounds per square inches. And that impact didn't just push the bridge, it crushed it. Massive, reinforced concrete pillars engineered to bear vertical load were struck by an unimaginable horizontal force. They didn't have time to bend. The internal rebar tore apart, and the structure shattered like a dry branch snapped in half. But the collapse of the bridge? was only the opening act. The roadway split, lost all load-bearing integrity, and gave way, dragging the first ammunition truck straight into the heart of the kill zone. The munitions inside, equivalent to 110 pounds of TNT, detonated, triggering a chain reaction. The next ammo trucks ignited in rapid succession. In just seconds, 1.1 million pounds of Russian ammunition became Ukraine's weapon. Moments later, the river surface was nothing but a scene of absolute destruction. The heart of the convoy was gone. In its place, a rupture stretching nearly half a mile, fire, smoke, and twisted metal exactly where the bridge had stood, leaving the remaining vehicles locked in place, completely paralyzed. On the strategic map, the consequences were even more brutal. Russia's command and supply structure for the entire southern front was severed instantly. 15,000 troops were cut off. Supply lines were broken, and they had less than 72 hours of ammunition and fuel remaining. The massive trump card Moscow wanted to bring to the negotiation table with Ukraine and the United States was buried in under 5 minutes. And just like that, with a swarm of autonomous drones worth less than $10,000, Ukraine didn't merely destroy a convoy, Ukraine erased an entire southern strategy. It proved a cold truth about 21st century warfare. Victory doesn't belong to the side with the most weapons. Victory belongs to the side that knows how to turn the enemy's greatest strength, massive size, and predictability into a fatal weakness. So what do you think? If you had to set a smart, low-cost trap to bring down a slow-moving giant, what would you do? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.